Welcome to Champion Minded, the podcast for those who aim for excellence, not only in the sports arena, but in life. My name is Allistair, author, speaker, mindset and performance coach, and my goal is to help you unleash your unlimited potential and provide you with the tools to achieve greatness. Are you ready to become champion minded? Then let's do this. Hey everyone, welcome to the Champion Minded podcast, or welcome back to it. I'm your host, Allistair McCaw. In this episode, I'll be talking to Martin Buchheit and George Perry. A little bit about these guys. Martin, who's a good friend of mine, was the former head of performance at Paris Saint-Germain Football Club. He also was at the Aspire Academy in Qatar and currently works for Kitman Labs and is based in Spain. George lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He's a track and field coach, an athlete performance coach, and a sports businessman. I was super excited to get these two onto the podcast to talk about their forthcoming book called EGOals, and it's all about ego in sports, not just in athletes, but in coaches too. Now, in this episode, I asked George and Martin why they wanted to write a book on ego, what they learned through this experience and process of writing this book, the biggest challenges they faced. They also talk about, obviously Martin worked with players such as Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Edison Cavani. He shares some experiences there with regards ego. So many people contributed to this book. It's just absolutely incredible. We have, people in the sports performance industry, well-known names such as Duncan French, David Joyce, Darren Burgess, Yves Casagrande, Adam Waterson, Salvas Griffiths, Pierre Lassas, so many names, Matthew Lacombe. I could go on and on. So I was very, very fortunate to have a sneak peek at the book, and it's just incredible. You guys will definitely love this one when it comes out. We also talk about, is ego the enemy? We've been led to believe, obviously, through Ryan Holiday's book, that ego is the enemy. But what's great about the combination of Martin and George is that they didn't agree on everything while writing this book, which makes it incredibly interesting and not just one-sided. Also, guys, a massive thanks to all of you who have shared a rating or review on iTunes or shared one of the posts or podcasts on social media. Greatly appreciated. Anyway, without further ado, this is George Perry and Martin Buchheit. Martin and George, welcome to the Champion Minded podcast. It's great to have you guys on.
Thank you, Allistair. It's great to be here.
Yeah, good to see you again, Allistair, and thanks for the invitation, definitely.
Tell me, Martin, let's start with you. How has your last 12 to 15 months gone for you, especially with COVID and all the changes?
Yeah, they were probably the most interesting months close to be in my life, like to be able to center myself way more on the family, and plus all the changes that happen professionally and also relocating, living in another country. It's been really, really good. So we are just super happy to be on a new chapter of our life, family-wise and work-wise. So it's been incredible. And I'm probably among the few kind of bunch of people who can say, even though COVID is not, we cannot say COVID is something good for us, but for me indirectly, it's been probably helping more than causing harm, definitely.
Excellent. And you're in Spain right now, Martin?
Yeah, I'm back and forth, but mostly in Spain at the moment. Yeah.
George, how's it been going for you?
It's kind of strange to say, but for where I live, I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It really hasn't been too much different from my normal routine. We just moved there before everything hit. And a lot of my work is done remotely anyway. A lot of my writing and marketing work is done remotely. And either way, when I showed up, I was going to need to build a new client base of athletes to train. And I think it really helped in a way for me, selfishly, that when schools weren't training their kids, the parents went looking for someone like myself. So I've been able to coach and work pretty consistently throughout the last year. And, working on this project with Martin has definitely taken up a lot of my time and bandwidth. So, if not for that, maybe I'd have a different perspective, but I was never short on things to do over the last year and a half. So I guess that's something I could be thankful for.
Yeah, so definitely have kept yourself busy. So just for our listeners out there, if we can start with you, Martin, if you could just introduce yourself a little bit, give us your background and, you know, what your current role is right now, what a day looks like for you.
Sure. So I kind of always try to introduce me as a sports scientist, but who has always been coaching on his side as well, and always been involved pretty deeply and hands-on. I started more as a conditioning coach. My initial sport was handball, which is pretty famous in Europe, almost unknown in the US. But that was 20 years ago. So been coaching, then it did a PhD, more and more sports science. Then I worked as a lecturer, working in different teams. And then I really started the heavy side of sports science when I spent 5 years in Qatar at the Aspire Academy. This is probably where I really developed a lot of my views and skills on the sports science side, publications as well. Then started to travel, worked, consulted a few AFL team in Australia, which was also incredible in terms of learnings. And the good thing is that those guys were actually hiring me for me to help and consult them, but I probably got even more from me that they got from me as well. So that was those brilliant years. And then 6 years in Paris Saint-Germain as a head of performance. So my role changed a bit more on the field side of the things. And now for about close to be 10 months, I've been working for a company called Kitman Lab. And I worked remotely for them, which is also linked to the current situation. But the fact of the job doesn't really require to do hands-on. And I help them to develop all the research side of the things with this company. This company works with many clubs and offer them an athlete management system to help them to work better together internally in the different clubs, like a hub to put everything together in the club. And I help them on the analytic side of the things to provide the insights to the club. So I would say that the job I have today is really a mix of everything I've been doing before, all the experience with teams, the research, and I'm pretty happy with the things we do right now. And on the side, there was obviously this project that brought us together with George.
I'm a track and field coach, athlete performance coach, and sports businessman. At some point or another, I think I've done just about every job in the sports world except for being an athlete. I really came into this industry sort of through the back door. After college, I was a submarine officer in the United States Navy for 5 years. I then had a brief stint at law school and dropped out around the same time that I discovered the world of sports science, exercise science, and that impelled me to go to the University of Texas, where I got my master's in sports science and nutrition. And I started coaching track and field athletes there. And I was with a semi-pro track team, the Austin Track Club, for about 5 years. Everything from coaching to managing the sponsorships to the business side. And, really took to all sides of sports, both being at the track and being on the business side of it. After about 4 or 5 years there, I started going into marketing full time, freelancing. So I've worked for a lot of sports tech companies, sports performance companies, really anything in the sports space, whether it's a company that does a digital activation or sponsorship activations for pro teams, to the newest piece of training gear, tech, virtual reality, whatever the case may be. And I write a lot. I've done a lot of written analysis of soccer and track, both again on and off the field of play. And then about a year and a half ago, I get a lot of my work through these online marketplaces. And it wasn't a year and a half ago, it was just over 1 year ago. I was on the marketplace Upwork and I saw a job posting, and it was from Martin Buchheit. And being a bit of a sports science nerd to make myself better, I said, OMG, Martin Buchheit is looking for an editor. I'm going to be a part of this because, in our little world, he's a household name. And you don't get too many chances to work with Martin Buchheit, especially if you're a relatively anonymous American in Oklahoma.
So yeah, because that was going to be my next question there of how did you guys connect? I was very interested in that. So obviously you answered that question there in terms of how you guys came together.
Yeah, but maybe I can give you a bit of more background of how I ended up posting this
Please
job
do.
on Upwork, because so this overall project about the book was something that was probably building up for years almost, and this is definitely there was definitely not in my job description. Of course, it was not something I could work on it, because as we are all too busy with our things. Uh, so I had started to give some informal calls that became the content of those calls, and those questions became later on the core of the interview that we did to build this work and this book. But let's say COVID again, I found myself with a lot of time, or more time in my hands, and I said that was probably the opportunity I had been waiting for years to start this book. And as you know, the two of us, Allistair, we had been in touch and discussing about this book project. You knew that I wanted to do that, but I don't think I would have ever had the time to really kick it off without the COVID situation. And then I quickly realized that and back to how I managed to get George involved, that I just realized that the task would be incredibly heavy with the amount of information that we get when we interviewed all those practitioners. And I just figured that I needed someone to help me to summarize, to put everything together. And I was looking for someone that had definitely George's skills, with, of course, all the background he has, but I needed to summarize things, put things into perspective, like to digest more than 100 interviews, pretty heavy content interviews, and bring that into life and do something meaningful. And this is not something I felt I was good at enough to do everything on my own. And then as soon as we kind of met, it was clear that he was the right person for that. So incredible chance, like completely something not expected, I guess, for any of us. But it's been incredible to have the chance to work with George. So yeah, that's simply how we happen.
I've obviously been doing a lot of interviews, and I've had more time as well because I've been in my office here for the last year, which is probably the longest I've ever spent at home. But there's one commonality of successful people that I've noticed in interviewing over the last 6 months, for example, and that's made they took advantage of the last year of COVID and got busy on other projects, finished books like you guys did, for example. They really went to work. They made it a positive, in other words. And that's just one of the commonalities I've seen I've spoken to some other people who have maybe not as ambitious, where, yeah, they just got by, for example, but it just seems that you guys didn't just survive, you thrived. So obviously the book is called EGOals, which I really love, which is large caps, EGO, ego, and then goals. Tell us a little bit about this book. Obviously, I've gone through it. I've still yet to read it. I just received it 2 days ago. So I've skimmed through it, and guys, excellent work. I mean, just the amount of contributors to this book, the amount of work you put in this. I've written books and I know how much goes into it. Martin, we've chatted once or twice where I said to you, the last 20% of the book will take 80% of the time, all the editing and all that. There's where the most stress is. The hard part is actually not writing it. It's that last 20%. But tell us a little bit about the book and why you decided to write it.
Yeah, I would say it really, as I said, it's something that built up throughout the years, and it became something very personal at the start, where I was aware that my ego had helped me, but sometimes as also being something like it deserved me as well. So I was more into an introspection, and then some challenges I had. But again, I'm not saying that it came up because of through only my time in this club. I guess it's something that it's also my experiences with other clubs, the consultancy work, and hearing other people in elite sports kind of struggling always within their own ego, but also others' ego. And yeah, it was really about finding solutions, but not finding solutions solutions for ourselves and to work better with others. But I didn't want to find solutions reading more philosophy, reading more psychological book, because that's something I felt I needed from the start, more context. And this is how it just started. It started with a question for myself, a curiosity for myself. And as often when you understand that those people have so much to say, you say, by the way, if it's going to help me right now, and it helped from the start, there's definitely a lot of other people that would have been happy to read that. And actually, I realized that this book was definitely the book I wished I could have read 15 years ago. And then once this was clear, this is the book I wanted to read earlier. I said, okay, let's do it. And then that's the story, how putting those interviews together and reaching and getting George involved.
Originally, like I said, it was really the opportunity to work with someone of Martin's repute and reputation, which is very, very positive in our field. But the idea of a book on ego and high performance sport, that combines two things that are very central and to my life and to my interests. I'm a proponent of ego, for lack of a better way of saying it. And I also, work in high performance sports. So seeing how those two would combine, I mean, right there, just the banner headline drew me in. But when Martin started sharing the contributors' responses to me and we started getting to know each other a little bit more, I saw that there was a really big opportunity here for the perspectives that I brought because I am pro ego. I was really surprised to see what a bad reputation and what negative repute so many of our contributors held the ego in. There was very, very rarely a defense of ego. There was very little material for the chapter Martin had put together about using ego as a positive in these kind of environments, let alone as a necessity for working in these environments and also for just being a, well-formed, fulfilled, whole person. And so I thought there was a huge opportunity to bring in a different perspective, maybe round out the picture of it a little bit and almost give the counterweight to what we are seeing a lot. I had never heard of the book Ego is the Enemy until Martin and I had spoke a few times that he mentioned that it was very influential on him. And then I saw that many of our contributors spoke about it. And I had never heard a statement as contemptible as ego is the enemy. And I said, I need to get involved and show that there is another way of conceiving of ego and using it in our professional and personal lives, primarily professional, given the topics of the book.
I can obviously, hear a lot of passion in you guys as well. Obviously, Martin, I've known you for some time now, and you were talking about this already 2-3 years ago, with the struggles you had, obviously working at a very, very high level of dealing with superstar egos, and not only superstars, but fellow staff, fellow team members, etc. So it's not only the players on the pitch, for example, but, this is interesting because I'm sure you guys clashed in a way of, Martin seeing ego more, if I can put it this way, as a negative thing. And then, George, you seeing, no, hold on a second, ego can be a positive thing. So tell me a little bit about that. Did your ideas clash in a way? Was it difficult sometimes to get through certain chapters?
Yes, at times it was.
No, I remember this call that we had with George, and because I've been kind of always I was always behind George because I put a lot of energy and time, as he has, of course, but I've always been the impatient guys to get things done, while he would always take a bit more helicopter view on things, making sure he would read a bit more things. Like I wanted things to get done, and I had already the idea of how it should be done. So let's say I was expecting him just to help me with this writing and do things nicely. But I had this tendency of, I knew where I wanted to go, which was the ego fuck-ups and the ego is the enemy. That was my vision. And sometimes I would not hear from George for a week or two. And we were WhatsApping almost every day. And there was a period, I can't remember exactly when, I think it was maybe
September,
October. And I could feel I was losing it. I was losing him. And I said, there's something wrong. So we need to talk. And then he was like, you know what? I'm writing a book and and the book is not me. It's not reflecting what I want to say. And I said, but that's perfect. Because George at this time saw that as a problem. And I didn't know that it was such a problem for him. And I didn't know that I didn't know that was a problem for him. So I said, but it's even better. Because now, if we manage to put on the paper our diverse opinion, the book will get even more balanced. And I'm so grateful to him because of this new perspective he brought to my old rigid vision that has been fantastic, you know. But yeah, I was close to lose him at some time.
I think the biggest challenge that we were facing, or that I was facing at the time, I mean, aside from the fact that prior to this book, you know, I mean, I'm my bread and butter as a writer is, you know, 1,000 to 2,000 word articles. And now we're writing introductions and, you know, doing this whole work of bringing together a book. So it was very much outside my comfort zone. And Martin obviously took a huge risk on trusting me with it in those early days. But one of the unique challenges we had is we had to represent to a varying extent the opinions of 110 contributors, plus ourselves as individuals, plus the team of Buchheit and Perry that's producing the book. So I felt like it was a really interesting challenge. And this is what Martin really helped me in September, October, is navigating all the different perspectives that we were trying to tie together and making sure that every one of those voices, he and I as individuals, he and I as a team, and then he and I as the compilers of 110 opinions would all work together in a way that not only read well for the readers and was useful to them, but that would allow each of us to put our name on the cover with our values and our integrity intact, because we're writing a book about integrity and values. And I'm wondering, how am I going to do this? And Martin, you know, threaded that needle quite well.
You know, guys, I know the feeling. You know, sometimes when I'm busy on my 5th book at the moment, and sometimes when I see it's my co-writer, editor, Denise on the phone, I'm like, oh, I don't want to pick that up. I'm just not in the mood to talk about this right now. But, you know, that's your partner. And it's a love-hate relationship of collaborating with someone on a project like this, because there's going to be disagreements. And it's, you know, anyone who's written a book will know that it's a lot of work and late nights and so on and so forth, especially when you're, you know, working another job at the same time. But let me ask you, Martin, what have you learned through this process that you know, working with George, that you maybe didn't realize before you started working on this project?
Yeah, I definitely realized that I needed to have this helicopter view myself as well. So hearing all those opinions, and we have a large chapter about the lessons learned from the contributors about themselves. And that was probably the best things for me to realize that first, I was not alone, of course, you know, but I realized that most of my peers, they were wiser than me. They were able to take some distance from the deception, from the daily battles, so they were just they were able to take some distance and keep their ego not in check, but yeah, to take this distance and just take it easy, relax, reflect, think about. It's not only about so that was very, very helpful to understand this aspect. And then that's probably one of the key core message about the expression we use is about the ego volume, and this ability to be able to be on the top of it and to control the volume and really use it as to turn the volume up when it's needed, but also to be able to turn it down when it's not needed, and really able to navigate and manage it yourself. So that's probably the best learning. And also probably, I would say, back to George's view on that, I accept my ego now better than before, because before it was the enemy, as I said, it was enemy for me and with the others. And now I'm kind of, no, fair enough, let's be proud of it, but we have to do it well. I mean, you're proud of it, but that doesn't mean that you need to behave like in an appropriate way, you know. So it really put things into perspective and helped me to get a more mature understanding on the positive and the negative.
So in other words, you've definitely become more open-minded on this subject in terms of, you know, what ego is all about. So George, what have you learned through this process?
I think it's just really been about different ways of how we can conceive of and talk about ego. You know, it's just this deceptively simple word. It's 3 letters. It means I. I mean, that's where it started. It's Latin for I. And yet, you know, you say it now and it carries so much weight. It's so fraught. And yet, when we asked our contributors how to define it, and we started doing the research on, how to reference books define it, there's just this huge expanse. It's a word that everybody uses, and we all assume that the other person knows what we mean when we say it, but that's not always the case. And I mean, that goes back to a lot of the disagreements Martin and I had over the years. Is when I say ego, I meant one thing. When he said ego, he meant another. But it was like we were speaking different languages. And so I think it's just, how can we talk about it? How can we bring some sense of perspective to the terms we use? Like Martin talked about the ego volume. And I think that's a really cool concept, because it's not about, a big ego or no ego. It's about how we calibrate our ego. And, the idea that we talk about a lot in the book is that, ego is a reality check. It's how does your perception of the self match up with the reality in which you're interacting. And I think sports makes such a great vehicle for talking about this, because we always say things about athletes like, oh, he's got a huge ego, but at least he's got the chops to back it up. Or you say, well, that guy's got a huge ego. Well, he should. Look at his goals, assists, all of his stats. Whereas in any other line of work, we don't give people that leeway of he's got the chops to back it up. You'll just say, oh, that CEO is an egotistical jerk. That startup guy, such an ego. Well, how do we assess whether or not they have the chops to back it up? Is their ego divorced from reality? Or is it reflective of everything they've achieved and everything they still have ambitions to achieve? And, Martin, we speak many times in the book about a major influence on Martin's life, and that's Zlatan Ibrahimovic. And I think he's a great example of a guy with a huge ego, but my God, he's got the chops to back it up. I mean, you can't really question him when he goes on one of his bizarre Twitter rants, because look what he's done in so many clubs at his age. And Martin speaks a lot about, that's not accident. He trains, he is rigorous. That guy is a professional. So how can I begrudge him his ego? How can anyone? It's got him to where he is, and he deserves to have it. And then how do we apply that to people, in other high performance work environments where they don't have a stats sheet? You can't just go to YouTube and watch their video clips and be like, yep, he's the real deal. His ego matches reality. But we need that reality check, in the rest of our lives.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Obviously, I agree with you there. He definitely backs it up. So in a way, so Martin, you worked with Zlatan for I think 2 years at Paris Saint-Germain. Is there any stories you can share with us? I know you mentioned him quite a bit in the book as well, but is there any stories you can share with us with regards to his ego or something that stood out for you?
Yeah, there are many stories, and it's always a bit of a challenge to be we are still on the frontier of respecting the stuff that happened in the club context that should remain there, and others that can obviously be told. But I would say that definitely I've seen him leading the pack at all levels with such a level of confidence that he had, that this confidence was contagious to everyone. I would say even the bus driver would think that he will drive safer because he was in the bus. And this is incredibly valuable for a team, because you just believe that nothing can happen as long as this guy is in the team or in the bus or on the pitch. And with me, he has been terrible, but on both sides, like he's been like, I didn't have a chance to make any error or mistake. It will be the sniper, but his level of exigence or his standards were so high that, once more, you just can't really complain about that, because he will be right. And many times in my daily job, he was so much on my back that he just made me better, because I had to lift up my standard at his level. And it would be about a drink I would prepare at halftime. It would be a session that we would deliver on the pitch. It would be any discussion about everything. He would always tell me if I was doing something that I was not at the standard he would expect, And as I said, this has always been for me the example of the really positive ego, on one aspect, as George said, because he can back it up, but also because he's just making you moving forward in such a way that you're going to end up better at the end. So this is incredible good side of the ego.
Obviously Zlatan is a leader. Let me ask you this, and let me pose this to you, George. Do you feel a leader needs ego?
Well, I think everybody needs ego. I mean, and we all have ego, and it's what we do with it. Leaders need to have confidence in their vision, and their vision needs to be rooted in reality, or else they're going to lead you right off a cliff. So when you combine the need for clear-eyed perspective on reality with confidence in the vision based on it, we're basically walking right into the definition of ego. So leadership and ego are inseparable. To Martin's earlier point, and to one of the chapters of the book, it's how they pitch it and how they present it. And this is where, Zlatan may have, kept the ego volume up a little too much. And, we can all think of those managers or coaches or whatever the case may be, who threw their ego around a little bit more than they needed to. But even when they do that, if they can back it up, people will follow. Whereas, you can have someone, so it's how they present it. It's how they tune their message for the moment and for the people that's leading them, not whether or not they have an ego or how big it is. There's definitely that, I think egos are by definition very aspirational, and they should be something that you can admire. And if you can cultivate that in yourself, then people are going to follow you, because anyone in these lines of work, they want to follow people that give them a road forward, that give them a road up. And how you present yourself in those moments are going to shape both your leadership and the outcome for the people who choose to follow you.
Now, a very interesting thing I've been thinking while we've been speaking here is that, you've both collaborated on this book on ego. You're obviously from the United States, George. Martin, you're from Europe, obviously France. Do you think Americans have a different perception of ego than Europeans do? Where, we're out there, we're not just going to the Olympics, we're going to the Olympics to win gold, that type of attitude. Do you find there's a difference?
Absolutely. And, I'm going to need a few years off after this book is done to recover. But I think the sequel should be the exact same survey to 110 practitioners who are American, because of our practitioners, maybe fewer than 10 are American. And I've thought that many times, both, one-on-one with Martin, but also reading through it. Americans, we are much more pro-ego. We're much more individualistic. And I think especially given the context of this book being high performance workplaces, I think we have a different relationship to our work than many Europeans do, in terms of where it plugs into the overall arc of our lives and the values that we pursue. So I think it's really a combination of two things. It's one, our ego as a whole. We are an arrogant country. We're a little bit boastful. We're a bit maniacal, for better or worse. And we also take our work and our professional ambitions very seriously. And you put those two together, and I think there is very much a cultural difference between Americans and Europe on this same topic. So I would love to redo this book or do the sequel on this side of the Atlantic, just to see if the theory that you've come up with or something I've thought of over the last year really does hold true.
Cool. So it looks like there's going to be part 2 coming in the future once you guys have recovered from the first one. But Martin, I obviously, I'm South African, but I've lived in Europe for a good 8 years. I lived in the United States now for 13. So I've seen both sides. I've worked in obviously Russia and certain countries, but when I lived in the Netherlands, and I think maybe this is, obviously Netherlands is not a Scandinavian country, but they have a similar culture, if I can put it that way. They all ride bicycles. So there's one. But when I was living there, I felt in a way, I was very ambitious in my career, and I felt in a way I was contained there, because they have this saying in Dutch called "doe normaal," which means be normal. So, I wanted to, and here's ego talking of how my vision and goals have changed from when I was in my 20s and maybe early 30s to now, where my goals earlier were to be the best trainer, to work, for me, my trophies were the athletes I worked with. The higher ranked they are, the better I am. There's ego there. As we're now, my goal is is serving people and enjoying people succeed, regardless if they're a recreational golfer or whoever it may be, for example. But I felt very contained there because they had this saying of, when you were trying to excel, they'd say to you, be normal, stay down. And that really irritated me. So would you agree with me in that, in terms of Europe, there's that perception of, just stay with the rest of us, don't excel?
I definitely see what you mean, and I can relate to that maybe, but also because you talk about Europe, but I think being French, we kind of puts us a bit somewhere else as well, because when I started to live overseas, I realized that we kind of had a bad press of being perceived as people highly opinionated. And I realized that I was probably like that as well, especially on the research side. I was the first to take the piece of people in a conference and just keep taking and saying that how bad they were, this kind of attitude, which were kind of coming just from the culture I've been growing up, So I would say that it's a bit hard and difficult to say that, but I've not always been proud to be French for the way we are perceived from the outside, and also maybe why I went into this way of thinking like ego is the enemy. I don't want to be like that,
Yeah. No, it's a very interesting one, and as you mentioned there, George, that could be a whole book in itself as well, of comparing the egos of different cultures, of how we view, what you think of yourself, for example. But just looking through the book here, guys, I mean, the amount of research you've done and contributors. I mean, I'm just going to rattle off a few names because if I was to mention all 100, we'd be here all day. But Selwyn Griffiths, Pierre Lassus, Paul Devlin, Nick Grantham, Mathieu Lacombe, Evie Casagrande, Duncan French, David Joyce, Darren Burgess, Darcy Norman, Ben Ryan, Adam Watterson. So from rugby, soccer, AFL in Australia, you've got such a diverse amount of people here, from different sports and different nationalities, etc. So incredibly interesting. How difficult was it to get all those contributors to, give their opinion, Martin?
Yeah, and that's really the cool part of it. And maybe when you ask me about the learnings, I could have mentioned that as well, is that the responses I had from, let's say, my peers has been incredibly, obviously, valuable by the content they brought. But the fact that 98% of them said, oh, that's such a good idea. I also would have liked to read this book 15 years ago. So let's do it. Thanks for that, And the engagement, the willingness for everyone to be involved has been almost surprising. Like I don't, as I said, maybe I got on top of my head, maybe I have less than 10 people I contacted declined to be interviewed. I've lost a few others that got busier, and then couldn't get in on time. But overall, it's been incredible how people have been just being happy to be involved because they understood the need for such a book, and they all have been into this journey as well themselves. That's why the different chapters we have kind of reflect this journey. There is, as I mentioned already, this long chapter about the lessons learned, which is incredibly valuable because it really tells what those people have been through and so on. But we also have a few chapters about the things that worked for them when they were dealing with people with the big egos, but the things that did not work as well. So it really tells that those questions were those that they would have loved to be able to get more insight about earlier. So it was pretty easy. Short answer. It was pretty easy to get them involved. Definitely.
Yeah, no, definitely. Just looking through the book here. I mean, obviously, just a lot of names I know there as well. So, George, let me ask you this: what would your advice be for someone who's listening to this right now, who maybe works in an environment where there's ego, or they maybe have a work colleague, and this doesn't have to be sports, this can be in an office, anywhere where they work with someone who has a big ego, and what's your advice to them on how to deal with this?
Well, I mean, I think that's probably the hardest question. And, so much of our book is about how to deal with your own ego and how to deal with others is really one of the more difficult things. And what we really gained from our contributors was the perspective that you just have to see what you can do to relate to them. See if you can figure out what their motivation is, what their core is, and really see where there is not just a common ground in how you, and where your interests and ideas overlap, but do you share the common goal? Where we really kind of, where we build to in the book are the conflicts that arise in the workplace between, are you having a disagreement over how to do something? Martin has one way of assessing fitness and I have another way. Okay, we disagree. Is that really a problem? As opposed to Martin wants to, get published in whatever journals in the next year, and I want to win trophies. Well, that's a much different conflict of what our goals are. So being able to identify, are you having a conflict that's based on concretes, or are you having it based on the abstracts that drive you? Until you really understand that as what's at the root of your dispute or your difficulties with the other person, it's gonna be really hard to go forward with them. And this was actually, going back to a question you had earlier, what did I learn? One of the things that I really learned, and that was surprising, having not worked in large teams like the two of you have at that level, it's the idea that there are so many competing and conflicting interests within the backroom staff. I mean, I can't imagine working for a team in any capacity where your role is to do something other than win. Why work in sports if you're not trying to win? But then Martin says, well, this guy, he just wanted to be the Instagram star, and this guy checked his ResearchGate clout score every day. And those little, they come across as individualistic goals, distinct from the team, but really they're these substitute goals, these auxiliary goals that conflict with the reason why we're all there. And understanding when you're in a situation like that is necessary to figure out, can me and this other person go forward, or is it going to come to a head and we either need to call in the manager or one of us needs to go?
Yeah. If we have a look at the example of, for example, Jose Mourinho, we can say that he has a large ego. When Jurgen Klopp came to England to work with Liverpool, I think it was 2015 or 2016, I'm not sure, but it was around about there. There was obviously that famous press conference of, first of all, let me go back by saying that Jose Mourinho deemed himself the special one. And, when in Jurgen Klopp's first press conference, he called himself the normal one. And all of a sudden, there was a change of perception of this person. People were attracted to him, that he was the normal one. Martin, explain that dynamic, why people all of a sudden warmed to this German that had come across to work with an English club, and just by saying one sentence, it almost just opened the gates to people being attracted to him, being warmed by him.
I think that's almost asking the question is answering it almost, by trying to be normal in a world that is so special and outside of the norms, brings people together, because people have challenges to work within this chaos of difficult ego and so on. So if you just bring another ego on the top of other egos, that the chaos is just going to be even more chaotic. But if now you say, no, I'm normal, maybe we can now think about working together. And it's not about who's winning individually, like in those zero sum types of deals, but maybe we might find a way to work together. And people suffer so much of not being able to collaborate because of those individual types of attitude, that when someone kind of opens the door to go into the collaboration mode, of course, why would not you go into the
I think that quote, Allistair, is a perfect example of what we talk about when we say ego volume, because I would have to imagine that Mourinho and Klopp have very similar egos, just given what they've done and what they hope to achieve. I mean,
Exactly.
Look at the trophy case, look at how they go about their job, look at how they've survived in this industry for so long. They have equivalent egos, but Mourinho keeps his on an 11 at all times. Klopp realizes that there's a whole dial between 1 and 10, and he calibrates the situation. I'm sure there are times when he puts it up to 11, but he also knows when to put it down to a 4 or 5. And in that press conference, he knew that having that big delta of ego volume was going to do just the right thing for the moment. And he won that ego battle. And obviously, he won Liverpool over with that, and he, gained a lot of fans. But it's a matter of how he presented and tuned his ego for the moment, rather than what's actually going on in his head. Part of, and you guys know, part of being a coach or a manager is just knowing people. It's being able to read the room, whether it's the locker room, the press room, or the city you work in. Klopp read the room brilliantly. Mourinho did for a long time. All the good managers do. And they tune themselves accordingly.
Let's talk about Edison Cavani. You obviously mentioned him, Martin, which I'm thrilled about. And you have obviously a story that you shared in the book about Edison. Do you want to just share a little bit about that with the listeners?
Yeah, as you said, I'm not surprised when you also say that was one of your favorite player, because I mean, even if you don't know him, if you didn't have the chance that I had to obviously be on his side for many years, from the outside, what he shows on the pitch makes him already someone special by the of course the efforts he put, the attitude, like he works so hard. Being an attacker, he's always the first to defend, for example. That's completely puts him in a certain type of defender which works for the team, so that's why, even without knowing him personally, without knowing the stories from inside, he's already someone different, and people like him. And that's why I like him a lot as well. But if you add the way he behaves on a daily basis, if you add a few things that he said throughout these years, it's been incredible. And there's a story that has been relayed a few times already, which is that was following a very, very disappointing results from the team, when the team had won the first leg, but then lost the second leg, and which meant
against Barcelona.
Yes, which meant out of the Champions League and everything. And it's always difficult to explain results at all levels, but the overall feeling was, or could have been, that the overall team had been too confident before playing the second leg. And whatever it is completely true or not, because it's always multifactorial, that was definitely the feeling that Edinson had. And when he came back at 4 a.m., instead of before going back home, he went into the locker, asked some tape, or grabbed some physio tape in the physio room, and he added a word in the locker on the walls, because those locker are and you've been even posting some of those pictures on yourself, Allistair. You always have those motivational quotes in lockers in the gym, and there was a word that did not exist in the locker at this time, and this word was humility. So he wrote it himself with a tape, and that just shows the mentality he had. And I think he just nailed it on this moment. So the respect I had for him even grew further and higher after this event.
Yeah, I mean, that when I read that part, I think it's in chapter 5. Yeah, that was really, 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 really cool to read that. I want to talk about vulnerability, George. And ego. Would you say that ego is, there's so many different perceptions as we've spoken about, and like you said, when you had all those contributors, you realized how different all the opinions were with regards to what ego was. But would you say that ego is an obstacle to our growth in a way, number one? And how important is vulnerability? Because to be vulnerable, you've almost got to let go of your ego in a way.
I obviously don't think ego is, I think, I don't know how you would grow without an ego. I don't know what would be growing without an ego. We're talking about your sense of self and how you relate to the external world, relate to others. make judgment calls and decisions. So, if your ego is getting in the way of that, then, it's kind of a self-licking ice cream cone. I don't really know who's doing the work then. In terms of vulnerability, I mean, that's an interesting question. But, it goes back to the question of confidence. I think that if you have the confidence to acknowledge where you are where you have shortcomings, where you may not be as good as something, if you have that level of introspection, then that's how you make yourself stronger. And I think this is where we kind of get into, it's not a question of like, big or small egos or whatever, but how mature, well-formed, and well-developed it is, as opposed to the dysfunctional ones. If you're threatened by your weaknesses, then you're more likely to have your ego volume all out of proportion to reality. If you're not willing to acknowledge your shortcomings, your weaknesses, to be vulnerable and to figure out what to do about those areas, you're not going to grow. You're not going to improve. And the ego is not serving you as a tool of ambition and aspiration if it's blocking you from improvement. Whereas a confident ego or a confident person would be secure in what they don't know and say, well, damn it, I'm going to get better at it, So I don't think the two conflict. I think it's really a matter of, and I forget how we say this in the book, it might have been one of Martin's stories, where it's like, if your whole identity is based around being right, if you can never admit to being wrong, if you are completely incapable of handling failure, how are you going to ever improve? And if you're not dedicated to improvement, then I think you've already let your ego wither by the wayside a bit. But I mean, I think I think the best definition, or the best, one-liner I've come up with in working on this book is, ego's your reality check. It's how does your internal self reflect the external reality in which we all exist? And because of that, some people deserve to have greater, larger egos. As long as they're in tune with reality, then you're not going to have an internal conflict or an external conflict, because no one will think you're either a jerk or self-effacing if how you present yourself is in line with objective world around you and what you've done and what you intend to do.
Martin, last question to you. Your definition of confidence?
I will definitely echo what just George said about the confidence, but if I can just reinforce this,
sure,
it's more like a vocabulary aspect of the things, because we tend, even when we have been discussing now, the three of us, we tend to say this guy has an ego because we see him as being overconfident and behaving in an appropriate manner, and so on. And this is actually a mistake, and we should try to change a bit the way we phrase that, because everyone has an ego, because ego is our identity, is us anyway. So everyone has an ego, but again, it's how, if you put it at the service of the good to great, how you handle it, the volume again. So it's not, I think the way to say this guy has an ego or this guy has a strong ego, we should probably try to get out of these types of expression, but say maybe he does not use his ego as he should be, or he's not, this ego is oversensitive, or he's too easily triggered. He gets offended too much. But it's not about having one or not. We all have one.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
I love that analogy that you guys use there, and I think it is one of your chapters. Is the volume, controlling your ego volume. I think that's so good, guys. This has been a great conversation on the book. Martin, when will the book be released, and where can our listeners get the book?
Yeah, so at the time we speak, we don't have an exact date, but it's going to happen over the month of June for sure. The book will be on sale on Amazon, and your listeners could have access, of course, to the different links we have, and there's a website where people can look at a few quotes, abstract notes from the contributors, testimonials from readers. By the time you'll release the podcast, it will be pretty timely. So we are really in the last phases of launching everything.
Okay. And for our listeners out there, what's the best place for them to follow you or to get in touch with you guys? You obviously don't have to give your phone numbers, but social media accounts, for example.
Yeah, I'm a bit more active than George, I think, on those channels. My Twitter is MART1BUCH. And on the website, we will have definitely there will be a possibility to reach us through the website. And I have my personal website as well. If you Google my name, even with one H, it works, but it's better written with two.
Okay, perfect. George?
I don't really do social media these days, and I'm currently building my personal website. So when our website comes up, EGOalsbook.com, there will be contact info for me there. My name's pretty common. If you Google George Perry Sports or George Perry Track, you'll find a lot about me. And probably one of those things has an email that still works. But yeah, the contact thing will become easier in the coming weeks.
Awesome, guys. This has been a great pleasure. And I feel very, very privileged that I have got my hands on a copy, obviously not in print, but in PDF version to go through. And I'm definitely going to be reading this over the next week. I'm excited about it, and I'm sure our listeners will be as well. So guys, thanks so much for coming on, and stay healthy, stay safe.
We will. Thanks a lot for your time and the interesting chat. That's excellent. Thank you.
So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed that one with Martin and George. Also, a massive thanks to each and every single one of you who have left a rating or review on iTunes. I greatly appreciate that. If you enjoyed this episode or any other episodes on the Champion Minded podcast, please share them. I greatly appreciate that too. Connect with me on social media. I'm on Twitter at Allistair McCaw, on Facebook, Allistair McCaw page, and on Instagram, Be Champion Minded. Until next time, remember, you were made for greatness. Now go do the work. Stay champion minded.